You've always known something was off. You didn't have the words for it, but you felt it in conversations that felt empty, in friendships that were loud but hollow, in the way people smile, flatter, pretend just to be liked. And maybe you thought the problem was you, that you were too cold, too serious, too disconnected. But maybe you're not disconnected at all. Maybe you're just awake. You see what others don't. You see the masks. The lies disguised as kindness, the validation, chase dressed as friendship. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's the price of awareness and the beginning of solitude. Here's what no one tells you about being an intelligent woman. Your mind doesn't just process information differently. It sees through the elaborate social theater that most people call connection. While others are lost in the performance, you're watching the strings, noticing the script, feeling the hollowness behind every rehearsed interaction. And that clarity, that ability to see what's really happening beneath the surface chatter and social niceties, it doesn't feel like a gift, it feels like exile. Like, you've probably spent years wondering if something's wrong with you. Why can't you just enjoy the small talk? Why does every social gathering leave you drained, not energized? Why do you find yourself making excuses to avoid events that everyone else seems to love? The answer isn't that you're antisocial or broken or missing some essential human component. The answer is that your intelligence has made you allergic to fakeness, and most social interaction is exactly that, fake. Schopenhauer called it a farce, not out of cruelty but precision, a social structure where people behave not from inner truth but from the fear of rejection. And it works because few things are more addictive than approval. Few things more paralyzing than the idea of being seen as different. So the game continues, smiling when there's nothing to smile about, speaking when there's nothing to say, nodding in agreement with things that quietly insult your intelligence. And with time, the mask no longer feels like a disguise, it feels like a personality. Women in particular are trained into this farce with more layers, more weight, more silence. Told to be agreeable not once but constantly. Taught to value social harmony over inner truth. Praised for being likable rather than honest. Rewarded for being adaptable, even when that means disappearing into roles they didn't choose. And many accept this because it's safer, because the system punishes resistance not openly, but subtly with exclusion, disapproval, discomfort. But intelligence makes the structure visible. And once you see it, you can't respect it. Once you understand that most social interactions are performances to avoid discomfort. Once you see that charm often hides fear, that politeness often masks resentment, and that connection is rarely the goal, control is, then the entire game begins to lose its value. High-achieving women often struggle with low self-worth and low self-esteem. It's a fact, but not a lot of people know about that. What's going on in her inner world? She's got a tough inner critic, she's super hard on herself, and that is a big problem that most people would not suspect is going on inside of her head. And this is a relationship with herself that is really toxic and dysfunctional and not loving. She picks herself apart, and that is part of why she's so successful, because she's super driven to make that go away. But the problem with perfectionism is that it's never enough. Perfectionism is a constant seeking of perfection, but perfection doesn't exist in reality. The intelligent woman's relationship with social life is complicated by this internal battle. She doesn't just see through others' masks, she's hyper-aware of her own. Every social interaction becomes a minefield of self-judgment. Did I say too much? Was I too intense? Did my intelligence show in a way that made others uncomfortable? The exhaustion isn't just from the fakeness around her. It's from the constant self-monitoring, the endless calibration of how much of herself to reveal. You felt it more than once. A compliment that sounded kind but carried something sharp underneath. A joke you were supposed to laugh at, but instead made your stomach turn. A room full of people smiling and talking, and something in you whispering that it's all rehearsed, all noise, and you thought maybe you were just being dramatic or sensitive or cold, but the feeling never left. And then one day, you started to notice the patterns, how some people praise you only when you're quiet, how certain friends get distant when you stop agreeing, how masks slip for a second and you catch something real, something tired and hidden, and you realize it's always been there. Only you were the one who couldn't ignore it anymore. Solitude in women is rarely interpreted as a sign of clarity. More often, it's labeled as arrogance, coldness, or emotional unavailability. Few ever consider that distance can be a form of protection, not from others, but from the slow erosion of authenticity that happens when connection demands too much compromise. For those with sharp perception, for those who notice the dissonance between words and intention, between charm and control, stepping back becomes less of a decision and more of a survival instinct. The intelligent woman doesn't withdraw because she feels superior. She withdraws because the space around her begins to feel too narrow, too scripted, too dishonest. Simone de Beauvoir understood this tension well. The pull between what one truly is and what the world quietly demands. When life offers two paths, authenticity or acceptance, choosing the first often means forfeiting the second, not loudly, but gradually through small corrections, social rewards, and silent punishments. Depth is negotiated down to something easier to digest, and those who refuse to dilute themselves start to feel the distance grow. In time, the noise becomes unbearable. Compliments feel hollow. Group dynamics feel theatrical. Every setting becomes a room where pretending is the price of inclusion. And once awareness takes root, there's no pleasure left in acting. Not because of bitterness, but because of principle. You were taught that connection matters, that being liked is a sign you're doing something right. That presence in social circles, activity in conversations, approval from others is a kind of currency. And maybe for a while you believed it. Maybe you played along, smiling, sharing, nodding, editing your words just enough to sound agreeable, filtering your silence so it wouldn't make others uncomfortable. And somewhere along the way, you forgot to ask why. Why validation had become the measure of your worth. Why a compliment could make your day, or why being ignored could ruin it. Most of what people call connection is reaction. Most of what they call community is pressure. Pressure to stay visible, to be relevant, to be available. Susan Cain described this perfectly. How the world began to reward the loud, the outgoing, the socially effortless. How quietness became a flaw to correct. And so many intelligent women learn to speak just to be seen, to connect just to be safe. But behind every forced interaction, there's a part of you that feels the cost, the fatigue, the loss of clarity. Because being visible isn't the same as being real. And popularity isn't freedom. It's often a form of dependence. If your existence depends on the reaction of others, then you've never really lived. You can't think clearly if every thought is edited for applause. You can't grow if every step is taken under someone else's expectations. And no amount of attention can fill the silence you've been avoiding, the silence where your real self was waiting all along. The more you think, the less you fit in. And people feel it. They feel it when you don't laugh at the same things, when you don't answer the way they expect, when your presence doesn't reflect their world back to them. And it makes them uncomfortable because you're not participating in the same rituals with the same blind devotion. You're not trying to be liked. You're not seeking permission. And that alone is enough to disturb the system around you. Most people want others to reflect who they are, not challenge it. They want smiles, validation, agreement, not honesty, not edge, not presence that doesn't ask to be approved. So when you stop softening your thoughts, when you stop shrinking your tone, when you speak without adjusting your truth to the temperature of the room, they label you cold, proud, arrogant, difficult. But you're none of those things, and you're just not wearing the mask anymore. Authenticity has a cost. It distances you from the roles people are used to. It breaks the rhythm they rely on to stay comfortable. It strips away the performance they mistake for connection. And for women, the cost is even higher, because silence was expected, agreeableness was rewarded, and now the refusal to perform is seen as a threat. Elizabeth Cady Stanton said it simply, "The strongest reason to give a woman freedom is because in the end, she stands alone, she thinks alone, she decides alone, and if she doesn't build strength from within, she won't survive the pressure to become something she's not." There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being intellectually awake in a sleeping world. It's not the loneliness of having no one around. You might be surrounded by people. It's the loneliness of having no one who sees what you see, who questions what you question, who refuses what you refuse. And this is why intelligent women often find themselves creating distance. Not because they think they're better than others, but because maintaining fake connections is more isolating than being alone. There's nothing lonelier than being in a room full of people and feeling like you have to perform a dumbed-down version of yourself just to belong. The conversations get fewer but more honest. The relationships smaller but more aligned. Solitude becomes less about isolation and more about preservation. Not a fortress, but a sanctuary. The goal is no longer to be understood by everyone, but to stop betraying what's already understood internally. And yes, it is misunderstood. The kind of silence that comes from knowing too much makes others uncomfortable. The refusal to entertain what feels false is often mistaken for detachment, even superiority. But it isn't about being above. It's about refusing to sink below a certain level of integrity. Most people are surrounded but rarely connected. They speak often but say very little. They share everything but reveal nothing. The modern idea of friendship has become an agreement of repetition. Stay available, stay pleasant, stay the same. And if you deviate, if you grow, if you go quiet, the connection begins to vanish. You weren't loved. You were familiar. You were useful. And when that utility fades, so does the bond. True connection is rare, not because people don't want it, but because it requires something they're not willing to give. Honesty, depth, stillness. It demands presence without performance. And in a world that runs on surface and speed, that kind of presence feels like a threat. So instead, we gather people like followers, attend events we don't care about, maintain circles that exhaust us, and call it friendship. But the intelligent woman sees through that. She sees the difference between companionship and emotional debt. She doesn't want to be surrounded if it means being unseen. She doesn't want to be invited if it requires pretending. She doesn't need a crowd. She needs space. Space for thought, for truth, for alignment. Mary Astell once questioned why women were given no environments to think freely, to speak deeply, to be taken seriously without needing to smile through it. That question still matters because to think clearly, you need room. And to connect honestly, you need others who aren't afraid of silence, of discomfort, of what happens when the masks drop. You'll meet fewer people who resonate. That's the cost. But it's also the privilege, because when you stop trying to be everywhere, you start meeting people who are real. And sometimes that means having 3 conversations a year that actually matter. And that's enough. That's more than enough. The woman who chooses solitude over superficiality isn't missing anything. She's protecting everything. She's preserving her energy, her voice, her clarity. Not because she's antisocial, but because she finally understands that being selective is not about arrogance. It's about alignment. And when she gives her time, her attention, her presence, it's not out of habit. It's a decision. And that decision has weight. Solitude isn't an absence. It's not an escape, a rejection, or a weakness. It's a strategy. It's what remains when you stop needing to be seen. When you no longer confuse movement with progress or noise with connection. The ones who understand this don't isolate themselves out of bitterness. They step back with clarity, not to disappear, but to observe, to build, to move without interruption. Petrarch spent years in silence, not because he hated people, but because he understood the distortion that comes from too much proximity to the crowd. Nietzsche saw the same, that solitude isn't for those who want to run from the world, it's for those who want to see it clearly. And in that clarity, something changes. You stop reacting, you stop explaining, you stop justifying your distance, because you know now not everyone should be close. Not every connection is worth the cost. Those who understand life are neither slaves to society nor fugitives from it. They are silent players. They know when to speak, when to vanish, when to act, and when to let things unfold. They are not loud, but they are deliberate. And they don't announce their movements. They let the results speak. For the intelligent woman, solitude becomes a form of refinement, a way to think without interruption, a space where thoughts grow instead of shrink. And once she sees what that space allows her to become, she doesn't give it up easily. She's not trying to be difficult. She's not trying to prove anything. She's simply not willing to lose herself just to be seen by people who don't even look closely. At some point, you have to decide who you're going to be when no one's watching, when no one's clapping, when no one's offering approval in exchange for your silence, your compliance, your performance. You can keep adapting, shaping yourself to fit what others expect, repeating the same phrases, smiling in the same moments, saying yes when every part of you wants to say no. You can keep doing that for the rest of your life and call it connection, call it normal, call it being polite.
Or you can stop.
You can start paying attention to what feels real, what drains you, what energizes you, what thoughts are yours and what beliefs were never chosen, just inherited. You can ask the question most people avoid, what would remain if I stopped trying to be acceptable? And yes, it's uncomfortable. It's lonely at first. But that silence, the one you were taught to fear, becomes something else. It becomes clarity. It becomes strength. It becomes freedom. Because silence is power. And choosing depth over noise is not a sacrifice. It's a return to who you were before the world taught you to perform.
Life isn't about fitting in. It's about finding what resonates with you and having the courage to follow that path, even if no one understands, even if no one follows. Because once you stop betraying yourself, you stop needing anyone to validate your existence.
Your intelligence isn't the problem. It's the solution. It's what allows you to see through the illusions that keep others trapped. It's what gives you the courage to choose authenticity over acceptance. It's what makes you unwilling to trade your truth for their comfort. The world will call you cold. Let them. They mistake your clarity for cruelty because they can't imagine someone who doesn't need what they're selling. They'll call you arrogant. Let them. They confuse self-knowledge with superiority because they've never met themselves without a mask. You're not broken for seeing through the performance. You're awake. You're not difficult for refusing to participate. You're free. And that freedom, that clarity, that refusal to sacrifice your intelligence on the altar of social acceptance, that's not a flaw to fix. It's a strength to protect. So protect it fiercely, unapologetically, because the woman who chooses truth over performance, depth over surface, solitude over false connection, she's not missing out on life. She's finally living it, on her terms, in her truth, without apology.
And that's where everything begins.